Good evening, everybody. You're very welcome to our lecture tonight. And on behalf of our honorary herald, Dr. Antonio Salmeron Cabañas, I welcome you all to the second annual Heraldry Ireland lecture. Heraldry Ireland is one of the two specialist branches of the Society, the other being Vexillology Ireland, the study of flags. Heraldry Ireland is the vehicle by which this society promotes an awareness, appreciation, and knowledge of our heraldic heritage. Genealogy and heraldry are very closely aligned studies. Indeed, heraldry often represents a genealogical narrative. Last year, we heard from Martin Goldstraw of the Armorial Register on how to design, commission, and register a coat of arms. This year, we have our new president, Frank O'Donnell, who has undertaken extensive research in the O'Donnell arms, both here in Ireland and on the European mainland. He's also author of the magisterial study, The O'Donnells of Tyrconnell, A Hidden History, published by Academica Press. The title of tonight's lecture is Heraldic Heritage, Heuristics and Hermeneutics. And just to recap for everybody, heuristics are the mental shortcuts we use for solving problems and to make judgments quickly and efficiently, and hermeneutics are methods or theories of interpretation. So without further ado, I want to welcome on your behalf, welcome Frank and our new president. And we're looking forward to this, what sounds like a very interesting talk. So go ahead, please, Frank.
Thank you very much, John, and good evening, everybody. This evening, I'm aware that by addressing a title like this for heraldry, that is with relevance to heuristics and hermeneutics, you may feel challenged to accept the relevance of such terms in the context of heraldic heritage. But in preparing for this preparation, I took some time to look at Ireland's heraldic heritage, to probe the antiquity and evolution of personal arms borne by armigers, to take a quick look at corporate arms, to look at the validity of so-called clan arms, and to see where Irish heraldry is and why we should care. So by way of introduction, I will just see if I can, as a starting point, I think there's two elements that are worth bearing in mind. Two purposes, maybe, for a lot of heraldry. One is identity, and the other is intention. Now, the science or art of heraldry provides, in other words, a cognitive framework that enables differentiation at a glance. On the medieval battlefield, it enabled instant recognition, but the attributes expressed could also reveal a vulnerability unless a declarative motto rejoined the arms in a powerful and assertive manner. Heraldry historically has been a form of shorthand for personal branding, as we might say today, by which unique or special features of the armiger's identity are revealed or suggested. That is a visual shortcut to explain individuality, sometimes a little cryptically, or even with wry humor, but in a way that other armatures can understand, whilst the general public might not and see only an aesthetic expression. So apart from the visual beauty of the aesthetics of heraldry and individual exemplifications, there is also the symbolic beauty of sophisticated layers of meaning, often with historical references, mythological fantasies, and even spiritual undertones, and indeed philosophical gems, sometimes captured in a visual element or in the motto itself. And as we go through this presentation, I will turn to an example from my own clan, the O'Donnells. So in any case, this gets us to the importance of interpretation. I've mentioned already on your screen, you see these heuristic elements. a cognitive framework, enables differentiation, a form of branding, visual beauty. But there's also the symbolism, the symbolic beauty, layers of meaning, often with historical references and so forth, and the motto. And that gets us to interpretation. Or if you wish, we move from the heuristics of heraldry, the quick fix problem solving identity recognition elements, to the hermeneutics, the multiple layers of attributed meaning, often aspirational, that is, expressing ideals, values, and outright ambitions. In a manner of speaking, we might talk of adopting a phenomenological approach, Husserlian style, to peeling away the layers of decoration in epoche or bracketing, to find the underlying significance that the arms concerned can have for the bearer, and perhaps even for the observer, for us as an audience. In all of this, arms and heraldry have been influenced not only by legendary narratives, medieval religious symbolism, military accomplishments, but also by science, technology, and industry. And we can readily see how that complexity emerges when we look at modern coats of arms adopted by institutions we are familiar with, such as civic associations, sports clubs, charities, professional bodies, municipal and other local or national government authorities, and in some cases by corporations, companies, and other private sector actors. In fact, it becomes difficult sometimes to see the difference between arms stricto sensu and a logo. And the issue of copyright is also relevant, because whereas a corporate logo is a form of intellectual property owned by the corporation and defensible in a court of law and governed through international agreements under the global governance of the World Intellectual Property Organization, for example, for trademarks, patents, brands, designs, etc. Instead, we have a peculiarly inappropriate situation in this country, in Ireland, thanks to the very imperfect National Cultural Institutions Act of 1997, whereby the copyright of arms granted by the Chief Herald of Ireland vests not in the armiger, who paid for it, but in the National Library. In other words, the armigers are subsidizing the National Library. And that is why the Genealogical Society is moving in support of a new bill to go before the Oireachtas to correct that and many other elements. The National Cultural Institutions Heraldic Services Amendment Bill 2024 will hopefully take off. But beyond this matter of legislative correction, there is the broader issue of safeguarding our intangible cultural heritage, including our heraldic traditions and much else. Because of the creeping erosion of cultural heritage and the rapidly changing nature of society in this era of accelerating globalization, when traditions are also frequently overhauled, it is very important to recognize the uniqueness of particular national or local inoffensive heritages as treasures, and to have them preserved and indeed supported. And for this reason, the Irish government was successfully urged to sign and secure ratification of the UNESCO Convention on the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage, the 2003 Convention. Ireland ratified and became a state party to the convention in December 2015, a full 12 years later, after long correspondence on my part dating back to 2009, and no doubt influence and pressure from other parties too. A list of over 18 cultural practices for consideration were submitted by me, and these included things like the traditional playing of the uilleann pipes, the Gaelic sport of hurling, and Irish harping. And these three have actually made it onto the UNESCO register, so that in 2017 we have the uilleann bagpipes, in 2018 the sport of hurling, and in 2019 Irish harping are all now registered with UNESCO from the list of proposals that I submitted. And with the subsequent support of their respective communities of practitioners and stakeholders. And this is the key issue, that if you want to get some element advanced through government to UNESCO, the government needs to see that there's a community of stakeholders standing behind it that will be served by this registration. Now, others on my list in 2015 included Irish heraldry, for which we haven't had really a coherent stakeholders group yet. The ancient traditions of inauguration ceremonies for Irish clan chiefs and chieftains, but also the cultural space of the Gaeltacht, St. Patrick's parades, Feis Ceoil, Sean-Nós singing, the manufacture of currachs, and the folkloric roles of the kings of Dalkey and the king of Tory Island, maybe even Puck Fair in Killorglin. But the important thing is that once the community of stakeholders is behind it and it gets registered with UNESCO, the nominating government commits to investing in its preservation. A benefit or return on such investment, if you wish, in addition to the preservation of the heritage, is the added value that the UNESCO brand can bring to tourism. In some cases, a practice may be nurtured in more than one country. Hence, Ireland is, amongst other countries in Europe, the Arab world, and Asia, registering and supporting falconry in 2021. Heraldry is a good example of another that Ireland could take to lead on. I recommended this in a presentation I made at the Second International Colloquium on Nobility in Madrid in October 2017, which was hosted by the Real Asociación de Hidalgos de España and the Fundación Cultural de Hidalgos de España, as well as the International Commission of Orders of Chivalry and Familia Storica d'Italia and other bodies like that. The theme of intangible cultural heritage was also resonant in the first webinar of the Irish College in Leuven, the former Franciscan convent of St. Anthony of Padua, which took place in October 2020 in collaboration with the Chief Executive David Grant. It was the first webinar of the Irish College in Leuven and was held under the commemorative theme Memorializing Emigre Dignity, to mark 400 years since the first burial in the chapel of St. Anthony, that of my family's ancestor, Donal O'Donnell, nephew of the famous Red Hugh. And many others were buried there too. But what I should say about this is that the webinar was also held to honour the 250 Irish emigre friars, scholars, soldiers and friends interred or associated with the college over the centuries, and brought out the cultural and social richness of the diverse personalities associated over those centuries. No less than something like 35 different Irish clans would be involved in a celebration of that. And as Michael knows, there is a publication of the proceedings of that webinar, which is imminently coming out in a booklet form by the Irish College. It's in about 100 pages or so. So let me now dwell a little bit on what we have before us here, the different branches of the O'Donnell's heraldry. But I think that before I get into it, the important point that I just want to emphasize again is that where Irish heraldry is concerned, we have this important challenge of rectifying the legislation through this bill that's going forward. And beyond that, of trying to promote heraldry as an aspect of our intangible cultural heritage that the government should bring forward to UNESCO. And that would allow us to know that the government will stand behind this, the institutions involved and the practices, and have them properly supported financially and policy-wise. Now, before you, you have 9 coats of arms on the screen. These are all O'Donnell arms, and what you have in each one of them is a crucifix of some sort. And the motto in all cases is In Hoc Signo Vinces. I will come shortly to another version, which was the result of a mistake by a herald in the Ulster King of Arms. But first, let us just dwell on these. So on the upper left, you have the common version that's used by the Clan Association, which is probably basically justified by the arms of the Glenarm O'Donnells, who went essentially extinct about 100 years ago. And perhaps that was why Edward MacLysaght picked up that version and started promoting it as clan arms, because there wasn't really an armiger to stand behind it. Then next to that, in the centre, the upper centre, you have the arms of Rory O'Donnell, the first Earl of Tyrconnell, as they appear in the earliest exemplification that we have now in the Chief Earl's office, manuscript number 34. And notice that the cross is blue or azure against a tabard background in gold. The same arms of Rory were picked up in an exemplification for the benefit of Brigadier Daniel O'Donnell in his service in France shortly after that. And in this version, you see that the cross is a crosslet, and it's red. Now, that's different from the earlier version. And you might ask why. Well, probably the herald involved, the Athlone herald at Saint-Germain-en-Laye and the Jacobite herald, picked the earliest reference to O'Donnell arms that was in the Ulster King of Arms, and that's in a document of Knights Dubbed. And in 1567, Red Hugh's father, Rory's father, Sir Hugh Dove MacManus O'Donnell, who was the King of Tyrconnell at a particular time, up to the 1600s, his arms were registered as a crosslet fiche, rouge, against a golden background. And so that's what this would be here. And that's the earliest exemplification that we have on record of any O'Donnell arms in the office of what is now the Chief Earl, what was then the Ulster King of Arms. And on the middle left, you have the arms of the extinct O'Donnell baronets of Newport, switching the colours around, the red and the gold switched. And we often see that these switches taking place in exemplifications, sometimes because the system of hatching is different from Zangrius to something else or back again. And so while you might have hatching without colour, just various pen marks, under one system it would be coloured one way, in another system it could be coloured the opposite way around. In the centre, then, you have the O'Donnells of Spain, the current Duke of Tetuan, who succeeds as chief of the name. And on the right of that, O'Donnell of Austria, the Austrian counts. And you'll see in two of these, the arms are per saltire. There's these little triangles on the left and right, or up and down. And this per saltire requirement or manifestation was said to have been a result of an influence from the King of Spain, who wanted the Castlebar branch, which is to say Larkfield and Spain and Austria, to differentiate from earlier versions, in other words, the versions on the top line. And in the lower bottom line on the left, you have the arms of my second cousin 3 times removed. On my mother's side, the late Cardinal Patrick O'Donnell of Glenties, where you have on the right side of the escutcheon the O'Donnells, and on the left side his episcopal arm. And then in the centre, the lower centre, you have the arms of the O'Donnell counts in France. And on the bottom right, you have my own. So moving on from that, just to say that the arms of the O'Donnells derive from those legendarily bestowed on the 5th century on Conall, king, the son of the High King, Neil Ní Gheally, progenitor of the Ken O'Connell, and after whom Tyrconnell was called. And it has been argued that arms did not really come to this country as a form of heraldry until the Anglo-Norman invasion. However, according to ancient sources on the life and acts of St. Patrick by Jocelyn of Furness in 1185, St. Patrick had taken his staff, Bachaliasa, and struck the shield of Prince Conall with a sign of the cross. Now, you will have noticed in all these, in 8 of the 9 examples I just showed you, if we went back a bit, that the cross is held by a hand in each case. In every case except my own. And the reason for that was allegedly a Scottish influence that came in during the time of the famous Ineen Dubh, the mother of red hue. Um, and if you go to Letterkenny Cathedral, you'll see there is a sculpted relief of St. Patrick putting the cross on the shield of Conall. And there's no hand. It's the original cross alone on the shield, which is the purest original form that my arms have tried to go back to. And all of this came from the influence of the conversion of Emperor Constantine before the famous Battle of the Milvian Bridge. And so that's where we get the motto from, and that's also where we get the idea of the arms as such. So Constantine the Great, who was responsible for the Edict of Milan, which gave religious freedom throughout the whole Roman Empire and converted himself to Christianity. This was something which obviously had great meaning for St. Patrick, who came along 100 years or so later. But in the original accounts of the vision of Constantine the Great, in Orthodox Christianity, they believed that he saw a hero, the P and the X symbol. Others, it's a passion cross, but probably it was a sundog. In other words, an atmospheric phenomenon where there's a halo around the sun, and there seem to be at the upper ends and the side ends branches, which are optical effects that look like a cross. Maybe this is even the origin of the Celtic cross with the circle and so forth. Now, the whole business of St. Patrick giving the arms to Conall is described in very beautifully in very old Gaelic in Laur Ingina Igonal, the Book of O'Donnell's Daughter, which you can find in the Bibliothèque Royale in Brussels. And this is by Owen Rua MacAward, who was the scribe, the poet of the day. Now, the earliest arms of Ireland, of course, are described as a golden harp on an azure field in a 13th century roll of arms known as the Weinbergen roll, said to be preserved in The Hague. And here, and generally, azure is a deep azure, a royal azure, like lapis lazuli, and signifies truth and loyalty, whereas gold signifies generosity and elevation of mind, and resonates to some extent. Now here we have from the Portuguese Livro de Armério Mor, on the left, the arms of the King of Ireland, and on the right, the arms of King David of Israel. And you will see the almost identical representation of the golden harp on a blue field. Now, so I was always struck by this similarity, almost identical. So that was that. Now, what is happening? I'm hitting the wrong buttons here, and I'm seeing other stuff come up. Here we are. Okay, so this is an early exemplification of the early arms, the ancient arms of Ireland, again from the Ulster King of Arms. The Arms of Ireland today, a modern rendition from the Office of the Chief Herald in 1945. And as you know, this is what forms the presidential standard and the escutcheon that is held at Irish embassies abroad. It basically has the same emblems. And coming back again now to Rory O'Donnell, you see these same two tinctures, the azure and the gold, in the earliest example of his arms, which were discovered down the country and then brought to the Ulster King of Arms over 1.5 centuries ago. But on his tomb in San Pietro in Montorio in Rome, you see it the other way around. You can see it's the arm is from a different angle, the opposite side, and the cross itself is red. And this is, the full picture of his tomb. The text on the left is describing who he was, how he was the brother of Red Hugh O'Donnell, and how he was Prince of Tyrconnell, basically. By the way, rather interesting, an entirely different note, when President Mattarella of Italy came to visit Ireland some years ago with his daughter and wife, President Michael D. Higgins gave a very nice speech of welcome to him and specifically referenced the burial of O'Neill and O'Donnell in San Pietro in Montorio. So, this particular tombs. So here is the other exemplification for Rory, made for Daniel O'Donnell of Ramelton, the Brigadier General in French service several hundred years ago. So he claimed to be a direct descendant of Rory, which he was not, but he was from a collateral line. So he got the benefit of the doubt. And he, of course, is the man who had the famous Cathach in his custody and left it with some monastery on the continent, only to be discovered a long time later and brought back to Ireland to Lady O'Donnell of Newport, who handed it over to the Royal Irish Academy, where it is today. And the book shrine itself is in the National Library, or rather the National Museum, I should say. The Cathach having been written allegedly by St. Columcille, it is essentially a psalter. And one of the little gemstones on the outside of the book shrine originally had a relic of the saint. We don't know whether it was a piece of cloth or a piece of bone, but it was a relic. So when it was brought to Ireland, that relic was there, but sadly it has disappeared and we don't know where it is now. Now, I mentioned earlier Sir Hugh Dove McManus O'Donnell, the 23rd O'Donnell, Lord or King of Tyrconnell. And he submitted to Sir Henry Sidney in 1567. And his arms were or issuing from the sinister side of a shield, an arm fesswise vested azure, cuffed argent, holding in a hand proper a crosslet fiche gules. And you all know exactly what that means, don't you? So, and this is the origin of the crosslet fiche that we see both in the arms of Donegal County, but also in various exemplifications. And so this is the very earliest one on record. And the arms that then formed part of the branches on the continent were retrofitted. So I'll come to that in a moment. But his family in the Heraldic Museum that used to exist on Kildare Street and then was taken over as a manuscript reading room at present, intervening period as an exhibition hall. In that room, there was for many years on display, since 1945 probably, this genealogical chart of the principal branches of the O'Donnell, kings of Tyrconnell. But in the center of it, you see just below the escutcheon, you have number 17, Sir Hugh O'Donnell, married Mary Ineen Dove, and his children were Red Hugh, Rory, and so forth. But this was only the second of his marriages. We now know he had a first marriage, and many people who were historically significant came out of that first marriage. But his second wife did everything she could to exclude her stepsons from the succession so that the famous Red Hugh could take over, as indeed he eventually did. But from a genealogical point of view, these are the two families. You can see on the left side of the screen, the first family descended from Nuala O'Neill, as she is identified in a poem in a book called Ráché de Chiolti Uli. And down through her first son, Sir Donald O'Donnell, who was Sheriff of Donegal, killed in 1590, you see a line of descent down to various characters on the bottom, Edmund being the third one, being the French counts, and Thomas being the one in the middle, a Jacobite lieutenant in 1699, my own ostensible ancestor. And on the right side of the screen, you see Ineen Dove and all of her children, with Red Hugh, Prince Éocha, Rory, and others, the Earl of Tyrconnell, first and second, Prince Hugh Albert, who did have the title of Prince in Flanders, though I don't think he ever got to Ireland. and the famous Lady Mary Stuart O'Donnell, whose escapade to the continent dressed up in male attire, pretending to be a cavalier, is really the stuff of legend. So the first family and the second family. And here we go now, let's see. Then the French O'Donnell counts, this is a brief sketch of them, all the way down to Sigismund Anatole O'Donnell, who died in 1879, yes, and whose wife, Jeanne-Marie de Pechperot-Comminges de Guiteau, who died in 1908, the last O'Donnell Countess in France. Now, that marriage bore no children because she was already the widow of Charles de Wendell, a famous industrialist, and had children with him. But by the time Sigismund and Jeanne-Marie got married, she was beyond childbearing age, and so no children came forth. Nor for Gustave Anatole on the left, who was a little boy who died at the age of 6. But my book spends quite a lot of detail describing this lineage and all the things that the characters in it actually did, including, for example, the one in the middle, Columban Hyacinth O'Donnell, escorting Bonnie Prince Charlie from the Chateau de Vincennes as a military prison down to Avignon and eventually into exile to Italy. And his wife, Marianne de Cartigny, who invigilated on the deathbed of Bonnie Prince Charlie, Charles Edward Stuart, in Rome. Many other important things too that I won't go into here, because just to give you an idea of the genealogy concerned. And this is the coat of arms of the O'Donnells, in that O'Donnell family in France, which is now extinct in the male line, as far as we know. So there you have again the crosslet, this time gold against the azure background, or in a modern version, that's what it would look like, based on the heraldic directories of Rietstap and Roland. So the collateral lines, on the other hand, descend from Neil Gareth, who was the fellow who betrayed Red Hugh and betrayed the English and seemed to keep on betraying people, and ended up in the Tower of London and dying there in 1626. So Neil Gareth of Lifford, as you may know, he was summoned to London by King James I, along with Rory. They were competing for the leadership of Tyrconnell, not just the clan. And Rory was eventually granted the earldom of Tyrconnell, and Neil Gareth got off with a title to his lands, but no other title than that. And so the collateral lines that descend from Neil Gareth are the Austrian and the Spanish O'Donnells, the Glacia O'Donnells in Donegal, and many other branches that went to Newport, to Mayo, and so forth. So they all descend from a common ancestor, an earlier ancestor of what became the last dynastic line. Their nobility was recognized on the continent. They got titles for their military performance in Spain and in Austria, and the arms that they bore were borrowed from the Royal O'Donnell mainland. That's to say the last regnant family, who were a cadet line. That's what I meant by retrofitted. They took a variation of Hugh Duff McManus's arms, who was not their ancestor, but this variation then also got the recognition of continental achievements in the ranks. And they all come from what is commonly known as the Castlebar line. And that's to say the Spanish and the French. And that is the per salter arrangement that came under the influence or arose as a result of the influence of the King of Spain. And so here you have the Duke of Tetuan, Grandee of Spain. By the way, I'm in the process of trying to revive the O'Donnell clan. We're having a big meeting and a parade in Donegal on the 8th and 9th of June. And we hope that Hugo O'Donnell will come, although he just wrote to me today to tell me he wasn't that well, but he wishes us every success. These are the arms of the O'Donnells of Austria. They're somewhat different from the other ones in that you have this double-headed black eagle with an escutcheon in the center. The escutcheon has two letters, F and I. and the F stands for Francis, and the I is Imperator. And that's the emperor, the Habsburg Emperor Franz I. That's the double-headed eagle of the Habsburgs. And it was emblazoned on the arms of Count Maximilian O'Donnell because he saved the life of Franz Josef in 1853 on the walls of Vienna. Now, I spoke earlier of a herald's error. And what happened was that a couple of hundred years ago, one of the heralds in the office of the Ulster King of Arms wanted to portray in a genealogy, not in a heraldic exemplification as such, but in a genealogy, how Rory O'Donnell, the first Earl of Tyrconnell, was a traitor and was attainted for that. So in his ignorance, this herald took the O'Neill arms, portrayed it upside down in the manner of being debased. This would be the debased arms of the traitor Rory O'Donnell. And then other people came along later and they said, oh, so that's the arms of Rory O'Donnell. And they righted it up again and they claimed it. And so they actually bore these arms. And these are James Bruno O'Donnell of Ballyshannon of 1772, who was executed in the French Revolution. He was actually the seigneur of a place called Corbrand. And the second one was Walter O'Donnell of Summer Island, 1806. And the O'Donnells of Trua Castle, Limerick and Clare and Baltimore, USA, who thought they were descended from Rory. All of these actually claimed direct descent from Rory O'Donnell, and none of it was correct. The genealogical pedigrees were mistaken, if not fraudulent. And so, but they claimed these arms for those purposes. And that's why I say, this is based on a herald's error, mistaken. And in fact, Charles J. O'Donnell had long, lengthy correspondence with, I think it was Sir William Bentham in the middle of the 19th century, disabusing the validity of these arms by saying the motto in Hoc Signo Vinces has nothing to do with this O'Neill coat of arms. In other words, it's just an erroneous juxtaposition. So Rory's arms, once again, that's what it looked like. And this is the version used by the clan. And that would be my own, keeping it simple. And thank you very much. That's it.